The desert sun hung low over the cracked asphalt of Route 17, casting long shadows from the rusted hulks of abandoned trucks that dotted the roadside like forgotten sentinels. Ethan Harlan gripped the handlebars of his weathered Harley, the engine's low rumble vibrating through his leather-clad frame as he led his crew of 20 riders through the haze. It was one of those endless afternoons in the Badlands where the air smelled of hot tar and distant rain that never came. Ethan, with his salt and pepper beard and the faded tattoo of a broken chain on his forearm, rode point as always, a man who'd traded the chaos of his youth for the quiet code of the road. But the scars from his army days, the ones that twisted across his back like lightning, still whispered reminders of promises he'd buried deep. Up ahead, a semi-trailer loomed on the shoulder, its chrome sides gleaming dully under the relentless light. The vehicle was parked crookedly, as if the driver had fled in haste, leaving the rear doors padlocked and chained. The convoy slowed as the first faint sounds cut through the wind, muffled whimpers, like the desperate pleas of something small and trapped. Ethan's brow furrowed beneath his aviator shades. He killed the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the cries that grew clearer now, high-pitched, frantic, echoing from within the trailer's dark confines. "Shut it down, boys!" Ethan called, his voice gravelly from years of dust and unspoken regrets. The bikes fell quiet one by one, a symphony of boots hitting gravel as the riders dismounted. They formed a loose semicircle around the trailer, their vests patched with the emblem of the Iron Vow. A fist clenched around a rusted key, symbolizing bonds that time couldn't break. Marcus, Ethan's second-in-command, a broad-shouldered vet with eyes like polished flint, stepped forward first. "Sounds like kids," he muttered, pressing his ear to the metal door. The cries sharpened, sobs laced with fear, punctuated by the soft thuds of tiny fists against the walls. Ethan's gut twisted. Memories flooded back unbidden, the humid nights in a far-off jungle, the promise he'd made to a fallen brother under a blood-red sky. "We look out for the lost ones, no one left behind." Those words had forged the club, turning a ragtag group of wanderers into a family bound by honor. He'd walked away from it all once, after the divorce that left him hollow, but the road had called him back. Now this, a locked trailer in the middle of nowhere, reeking of something foul, like neglect and desperation. "Get that lock off," Ethan ordered, his tone steady but edged with the quiet fury that simmered in men who'd seen too much. Tommy, the youngest in the crew with his quick hands and quicker temper, pulled a bolt cutter from his saddlebag. The chain snapped with a metallic crack, the sound slicing through the tension like a gunshot. The door creaked open on protesting hinges, revealing a dim interior stacked with crates and shadowed corners. And there, huddled in the far end amid the gloom, were 3 small figures, children no older than 10, their faces streaked with dirt and tears. The oldest, a girl with tangled brown hair, clutched the others protectively, her eyes wide with a terror that hit Ethan like a punch to the chest. They were filthy, clothes torn and clinging to thin frames, the air thick with the sour tang of unwashed fear. No signs of fresh wounds, but the way they flinched at the light spoke of shadows that lingered longer than bruises. "It's okay," Ethan said softly, kneeling to their level, his massive form careful not to loom. "We're not here to hurt you. How'd you end up in here?" The girl, who later whispered her name was Lila, trembled as she spoke. "The man, he locked us in after the town, said we'd fetch a price somewhere quiet. Please don't let them find us." The riders exchanged grim looks. Human cargo on a forgotten highway. It stank of the underbelly Ethan had sworn to fight, the kind of corruption that preyed on the vulnerable while badges looked the other way. Marcus radioed for help, but Ethan knew the local sheriff's office was a joke, riddled with favors and blind eyes. This wasn't just a rescue, it was a spark to an old flame. 20 years ago, he'd vowed to his dying comrade to protect the innocent, no matter the cost. That promise had faded under the weight of his own losses, a wife gone, a daughter he barely knew. But now it roared back, demanding he step up. As the children emerged into the sunlight, blinking against the glare, the crew wrapped them in spare jackets, the leather a makeshift shield against the chill wind picking up. Lila clung to Ethan's hand, her small fingers trusting in a way that cracked something inside him. "You promise you'll keep us safe?" she asked, her voice a fragile thread. Ethan nodded, the weight of it settling like an anchor. "On my word, kid, Iron Vow doesn't break." Word spread fast along the Ryder grapevine. By nightfall, as the children were handed to a sympathetic nurse at the roadside clinic, a woman named Sophia with kind eyes and steady hands, Ethan's phone buzzed with calls from brothers across state lines. The story leaked. Bikers bust open mystery trailer. Save kids from traffickers. Reporters swarmed the clinic's parking lot, their cameras flashing like distant storms. But Ethan slipped away with his core crew, the desert night swallowing their tail lights. Back at the motel on the outskirts, under the neon buzz of a flickering sign, Ethan stared at the stars through the window. The promise he'd renewed today wasn't just for Lila and her siblings. It was for the man he'd buried, for the family he'd lost, and for the road ahead that now demanded justice. The trailer had been traced to a shadowy operation, whispers of bigger players pulling strings from city halls to border towns. Ethan's fists clenched. The Iron Vow would ride, not for glory, but for the honor that bound them. Dawn broke with the roar of engines multiplying. What started as 20 riders swelled to 50, then more, as word of the crying trailer ignited a fire. Ethan mounted up, the children's grateful hug still warm in his memory. This was no random act. It was the fulfillment of a vow long dormant, a stand against the darkness that hid in plain sight, and as the convoy thundered toward the horizon, the nation began to watch, unaware of the moral storm brewing on two wheels. The first leads pointed to a corrupt depot miles away, where shadows moved under the cover of legitimate freight. Ethan rode with purpose, the wind whipping his face, carrying the faint echo of those cries. Redemption wasn't a destination, it was the ride itself, paved with loyalty and the unyielding grip of a promise kept. Little did he know, unlocking that trailer had cracked open a web that reached far beyond the desert, one that would test the Iron Vow like never before. The convoy cut through the pre-dawn haze like a blade through silk, engines growling in unison as the desert gave way to the skeletal outlines of an industrial sprawl. Ethan Harlan rode at the front, his Harley a black stallion under the emerging light, the vibration humming up his arms like an old wound awakening. Behind him, the Iron Vow had swelled, 50 riders now, a thunderous phalanx drawn from distant chapters, their headlights piercing the gloom like accusatory eyes. The air carried the metallic bite of cooling engines mixed with the faint, acrid scent of diesel from the depot ahead, a sprawling yard of chain-link fences and looming warehouses that squatted on the edge of a forgotten town. Word of the trailer had spread like wildfire through encrypted channels and backroad whispers, pulling in brothers Ethan hadn't seen in years. There was Caleb, a wiry mechanic from the eastern fringes, his face etched with the lines of a man who'd lost a leg to an IED but never his fire. And beside him rode Lena, one of the few women in the fold, a former combat medic with a no-nonsense braid and a scar across her collarbone that matched Ethan's own in silent solidarity. They'd all heard the story, the cries from the dark, the snap of the chain, the wide-eyed trust of children who'd seen hell's underbelly. It wasn't just news, it was a call to the vow that bound them, the one Ethan had etched into the club's charter after that jungle night 2 decades back. As they neared the depot gates, the first rays of sun glinted off razor wire, turning the scene into a jagged mosaic. The place was a fortress of shadows, semi-trucks idling like beasts in their pens, but something felt off, the unnatural quiet, broken only by the distant bark of a guard dog. Ethan signaled a halt, the bikes idling down to a low purr that echoed off the corrugated walls. Marcus dismounted first, his boots crunching on loose gravel as he scanned the perimeter with binoculars pulled from his vest. Two guards at the main gate, armed but sloppy, cameras on the corners, but the feeds looked looped. Someone's expecting trouble or covering it. Ethan nodded, dismounting with a creak of leather. The weight of Lila's small hand in his from the day before lingered, a ghost grip urging him forward. He'd dropped the kids at the clinic with Sophia, who promised to shield them from the vultures circling with notebooks and lenses. But sleep had evaded him, replaced by visions of that trailer's dim interior, the crates that hid more than freight. A quick search of the rig's cab had yielded manifests with coded entries, names blurred, destinations vague, but enough to point here to Harlan Freight Lines, a front for the kind of operation that thrived on silence and payoffs. "Split up," Ethan murmured, his voice low against the wind picking up, carrying the faint tang of rust and oil. "Caleb, Lena, flank the east side. Cut the power if you can. Tommy, Marcus with me. We go in quiet, get eyes on what's moving." The group dispersed like smoke, shadows melting into the chain link's embrace. Ethan's heart pounded with the steady rhythm of purpose, but doubt gnawed at the edges. His ex-wife's voice echoing from a decade-old argument. "You're chasing ghosts, Ethan. When does the road let you stop?" He'd walked away then, leaving their daughter in the rear view, but this was no ghost. This was flesh and fear, locked away for profit. They breached the fence with wire cutters, the snip-snip a hushed percussion under the stars fading overhead. Inside, the yard unfolded in greys and silvers, stacks of pallets shrouded in tarps, the low hum of generators masking deeper secrets. Ethan led the way to the central warehouse, its massive doors ajar, just enough to spill a sliver of fluorescent light. Peering through, they saw it. More trailers, not the open haulers of legit cargo, but sealed units like the one on Route 17, padlocked and chained. Workers in unmarked jumpsuits milled about, their faces hard and averted, loading boxes that clinked with unnatural weight. A voice cut the tension, gruff, from a side office. "You hear about those bikers, snooping where they shouldn't." Laughter followed, oily and confident, from men in ill-fitting suits who reeked of cheap cologne even from afar. Ethan froze as one pulled out a radio, barking coordinates that matched their position. Alarms blared suddenly, red lights strobing across the yard like arterial blood. "Ambush!" Marcus hissed, drawing his sidearm, not for killing but for the warning shot that cracked the night. Chaos erupted. Guards spilled from the shadows, batons raised, but the iron vow was ready. Caleb's team flipped a breaker, plunging half the yard into black, engines roaring to life as reinforcements poured through the gates. Ethan charged forward, tackling a figure emerging from the warehouse, a burly driver whose eyes widened in recognition. "Harlan, you son of a—" The man swung, but Ethan dodged, pinning him against a crate. "Who runs this? Names now. Those kids weren't the first." The driver spat gravel, but fear cracked his facade. "Bigger than you think. Councilman Reyes pulls strings, pays off the badges. It's a pipeline, from borders to auctions in the cities." Ethan's blood ran cold. Corruption this deep meant the law was complicit, turning justice into a joke. Punches flew in the melee, bodies grappling under the floodlights that flickered back on, but the bikers fought with precision, disarming, not destroying, their code demanding truth over vengeance. Lena's voice crackled over the radio. "We've got eyes on more trailers. Sounds like movement inside. Kids, maybe worse." Ethan released the driver, zip-tying his wrists as sirens wailed in the distance. Real ones this time, or so they hoped. The crew extracted, dragging out documents and a ledger that named players from low-level haulers to suited officials. As they mounted up, the depot ablaze with activity behind them. Ethan felt the vow tighten like a noose around his soul. This web stretched to heartlands he'd once called home, threatening the fragile peace he'd built on two wheels. Back on the open road, the sun climbing higher, casting golden halos on sweat-slicked faces, the riders paused at a roadside diner. Coffee steamed in mugs, black as the night they'd pierced, while maps spread across scarred tables. Lila's face haunted Ethan, her trust a mirror to his daughters, lost to time and his wanderings. "We ride to the source," he declared, the words sealing another layer of the promise. But as calls flooded in from national outlets, the story exploding across airwaves, Ethan wondered if honor would be enough against a machine greased by power. The iron vow pressed on, engines devouring miles, toward a reckoning that would demand everything. And now I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed like distant hornets, casting a pallid glow over the formica tables scarred by years of knives and regrets. Ethan Harlan sat hunched over a lukewarm cup of coffee, the steam curling up like ghosts from the desert night they'd just clawed through. The air inside was thick, with the greasy sizzle of bacon and the murmur of truckers at the counter, oblivious to the storm brewing in the corner booth. Maps unfurled across the vinyl seats showed red ink routes snaking from the depot to a cluster of towns deeper in the heartland, where the ledger's names pointed like accusing fingers. Councilman Reyes at the top, his signature a scrawl of entitlement, backed by a network of haulage firms and silent sheriffs. Marcus slid into the seat across from Ethan, his knuckles still raw from the scuffle, a fresh bruise blooming under his eye like a purple dawn. That driver spilled enough to bury them, but not before calling in favors. Sirens were closing fast, had to ghost out. He tapped the ledger, its pages dog-eared and stained with coffee rings. Lena leaned against the booth's edge, her braid frayed from the wind, wiping grease from her hands on a napkin. "More trailers in that warehouse." "Ethan, we heard the echoes, same as Route 17, not just kids, sounded like families crammed in tight." Her voice carried the weight of her medic days, steady but laced with the quiet rage of someone who'd patched up the broken too many times. Ethan's gaze drifted to the window, where the convoy idled in the lot, engines ticking as they cooled under the rising sun. 50 riders now, but calls kept coming, more brothers en route from the coasts, drawn by the vow's invisible pull. The news had hit the wires overnight. Bikers bust human smuggling ring, children rescued from desert trailer. Cameras had swarmed the clinic, but Sophia had stonewalled them, her fierce protectiveness buying time. Lila's face flashed in Ethan's mind, those wide eyes, trusting him in a way he hadn't earned yet. It mirrored the photo in his wallet, faded and creased, his daughter Emily at 8, before the divorce shattered everything. He'd promised her the world once, then rode away to chase shadows. Now, the road demanded he make it right, one locked door at a time. "We hit Reyes next," Ethan said, his voice low, gravel over steel. "His office in Milford, 30 miles east. The ledger ties him to the pipeline, border pickups funneled through depots like that one, sold off quiet to the highest bidder." Tommy, nursing a split lip at the table's end, slammed his fist lightly on the map. "Guy's got pull. Local PD's in his pocket. We roll in loud, it's a trap." Caleb nodded from the shadows, his prosthetic leg propped on a chair, the faint whir of its hydraulics a reminder of battles won and lost. "Quiet then. Infiltrate, grab proof. We're not vigilantes. We're the vow. Honor first." The group fell silent as a waitress refilled cups, her eyes flicking curiously over the leather vests and the tension humming like live wires. Outside, the sun climbed, turning the lot into a sea of chrome and shadow, the scent of hot asphalt seeping through the cracks. Ethan felt the old scar on his back pull tight, a phantom ache from that jungle promise. Watch the innocence, brother. Or what's the fight for? He'd buried his comrade under foreign soil, then buried the grief under miles of blacktop. The club had risen from those ashes. Iron vow, a family forged in loss, where loyalty wasn't blood but choice. Lena caught his eye, her nod a silent affirmation. She'd lost her own kin to the same shadows they chased now, joining the ride to reclaim what corruption stole. They mounted up as the clock ticked past 7, the diner fading in the rear view like a half-remembered dream. The convoy thundered east, cutting through scrubland dotted with wind-bent Joshua trees, their branches clawing at the sky. Ethan led, the wind whipping his beard, carrying the faint echo of cries from trailers yet unseen. Milford emerged on the horizon, a sleepy town of clappered facades and picket fences hiding rot beneath the paint. Reyes' office squatted on Main Street, a brick building with tinted windows and a flag drooping lazily from its pole, the air around it heavy with the irony of false justice. They parked a block away, bikes concealed in an alley behind a shuttered garage, the smell of oil and rust a comforting shroud. "Scout teams only," Ethan instructed, dividing the crew. Marcus and Tommy took the front, posing as locals with a flat-tire ruse. Lena and Caleb circled back, eyes on the alleys for tails. Ethan waited in the shadows, heart steady but mind racing, doubts whispering of the cost. If Reyes was the head, cutting it off might unleash worse, but walking away. That betrayed the vow, the kids, the man he'd been. Marcus radioed in first. Security's light. One rent-a-cop dozing at the desk. Files in the back office, looks promising. They slipped inside during a shift change, the door's bell tinkling like a warning. The interior was sterile. Beige walls lined with plaques of community service, the air conditioned to a chill that masked deeper decay. Tommy jimmied a lock on a cabinet, pulling folders thick with manifests, dates, routes, payments coded in euphemisms that screamed truth. "Reyes signs off on every load," he whispered, snapping photos with a burner phone. "Ties to the border patrols, whole chains greased." But footsteps echoed from the hall, Reyes himself, paunchy in a rumpled suit, barking into a cell. "Those bikers? Handle it. No loose ends." Ethan tensed in the adjoining room, peering through a vent as the man rifled drawers, his face twisting in panic. A shadow moved outside, sheriff's cruiser pulling up, lights off, but purposeful. "Time's up," Ethan hissed into the radio. The team exfiltrated through a side exit, folders clutched like contraband lifelines, melting into the alley as shouts rose behind them. Back on the bikes, peeling out toward the highway, Ethan gripped the bars until his knuckles whitened. The evidence burned in his saddlebag, enough to crack the facade, but Reyes' call meant hunters on their trail. The convoy reformed, engines roaring defiance, the sun now high and unforgiving. National news vans dotted the interstate ahead, reporters hungry for the biker angle, but Ethan waved them off in his mind. This wasn't spectacle. It was redemption, a promise threading through the miles. As they pushed deeper into the heartland, whispers of a larger auction loomed, a gathering in an abandoned mill 2 states over, where the pipeline converged. Lila's voice echoed in Ethan's thoughts. "You promise?" He did. The iron vow swelled to 70, allies from forgotten chapters joining the fray, their shared scars a tapestry of loyalty. But with every mile, the web tightened, pulling in old ghosts. Ethan's daughter, reaching out via a hesitant text. "Dad, saw the news. Be careful." Honor demanded he ride on, toward a confrontation that would test not just the club, but the man he'd become. The road stretched endless, paved with choices that echoed like thunder. The asphalt blurred beneath the tires like a river of molten black. The convoy's roar, a defiant symphony against the heartland's vast silence. Ethan Harlan leaned into the curve, his Harley slicing through the midday heat that shimmered off the fields of golden wheat, bowing under an invisible weight. 70 riders now trailed him, an ironclad legion stretching back a mile, their engines a low thunder that rattled fence posts and sent birds scattering from telephone wires. The air whipped past, carrying the dry scent of earth and exhaust, a reminder that every mile peeled back another layer of the web they'd torn into. The ledger's secrets burned in Ethan's mind, Reyes' name etched like a curse, linking the depot to this auction in the ghost town of Eldridge, where shadows traded lives like commodities under the guise of forgotten industry. Lena rode flank, her bike humming steady beside Marcus, her eyes scanning the horizon for the glint of pursuit. The text from Emily still weighed on Ethan's phone, tucked in his vest. "Dad, saw the news. Be careful." It was the first in years, a fragile bridge over the chasm he'd carved with his absences. He'd replied with a simple, "I will," but the words felt hollow against the vow pulling him forward. The iron vow wasn't just a club. It was the family he'd chosen when blood failed him, forged in the fires of loss and loyalty. Caleb's voice crackled over the helmet comms, his tone laced with the grit of a man who'd stared down worse odds. "Scouts report Eldridge ahead. Mills on the outskirts, boarded up but active. Trucks rolling in since dawn, no plates." Ethan keyed his mic, the wind muffling his response. Eyes sharp. "We circle wide, no charge till we confirm the cargo." The plan had formed over diner coffee. Infiltrate the Mills perimeter. Document the auction, then call in outsiders who weren't bought. Federal eyes, perhaps, or journalists with spines. But doubt coiled in his gut like barbed wire. Reyes's network ran deep. Whispers of payoffs to feds and media plants, ensuring stories twisted before they aired. The news cycle had shifted overnight, headlines screaming, "Vigilante bikers or heroes," cameras chasing the convoy like hounds. But Ethan kept them at bay, the road his shield. As Eldridge materialized from the haze, a cluster of sagging barns and cracked sidewalks, the mill looming like a skeletal giant on the riverbank, the group splintered into shadows. The building's brick facade peeled under ivy, windows shattered eyes, staring blankly at the overcast sky. The air grew heavy with the musty tang of damp stone and rotting timber, undercut by the sharp bite of idling engines hidden in the underbrush. Ethan dismounted first, boots sinking into soft mud by the water's edge, the river murmuring secrets to the reeds. Marcus and Tommy fanned out along the tree line, binoculars catching flashes of movement. Men in dark coats herding figures toward loading docks, silhouettes too small for adults bundled against the chill. From a rusted catwalk overlooking the yard, Ethan peered down, heart clenching at the sight. Trailers, a dozen at least, chained in a semicircle under floodlights that buzzed like angry wasps. Muffled sounds drifted up, whimpers, shuffles, the clink of locks, echoing the nightmare of Route 17. Workers barked orders, their faces anonymous under caps, unloading crates that thudded heavily onto pallets. One group emerged from a trailer, a family perhaps, mother shielding two young ones, their steps hesitant on the gravel. No overt signs of harm, but the fear etched in their postures spoke volumes, a silent accusation against the machinery of indifference. "Got visuals," Lena whispered over the comm, her position perched on a nearby silo. "Buyers arriving, suits from the cities, out-of-state plates. Reyes' chopper just touched down on the pad, private, no markings." Ethan's jaw tightened, the scar on his back itching like a fresh burn. This wasn't fringe, it was institutional rot, the kind that started with a blind eye and ended in locked doors. He thought of his comrade's last breath, the promise gasped in the jungle's embrace. "Protect them, Ethan, the weak ones, make it mean something." He'd failed his own once, riding away from Emily's tears, but here, In this forsaken mill, redemption beckoned like a distant light. They moved in whispers, Caleb's team cutting through underbrush to plant hidden cams, tiny eyes to capture the deals unfolding. Tommy snapped photos from the shadows, the shutters click lost in the wind. But tension snapped like a frayed rope when a guard rounded the corner, flashlight beam slicing the dusk. "Who's there?" The man growled, hand dropping to his holster. Marcus lunged from cover, tackling him silently into the mud, a forearm across the throat just enough to quiet without harm. "Tie him," Ethan ordered, voice steady as he rifled the guard's pockets. A radio tuned to Reyes's frequency, coordinates for extraction points blinking on a GPS. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. A sheriff's echo chasing ghosts, but the Iron Vow held position. Inside the mill's cavernous belly, voices rose, Reyes' oily timbre sealing bids. "Lot 12, prime from the south, starting at 20. Ethan's blood boiled. It was lives on the block, innocence auctioned to the highest bidder. He signaled retreat, the team melting back to the bikes as rain began to patter, turning the ground to slick clay. Engines ignited in sequence, a controlled rumble to mask their exit, the convoy slipping into the gathering storm like wraiths. Miles out, under a roadside overpass where water drummed on metal roofs, they regrouped. The cams beamed footage to a secure laptop Caleb jury-rigged, images flickering, faces, transactions, Reyes' smug profile captured in grainy clarity. "This goes viral," Lena said, her fingers flying over keys, uploading to allies in the press, outlets hungry for truth over spin. Ethan's phone buzzed again. "Emily. Heard about the mill. Proud? Scared?" He paused, thumbs hovering. "Both. Coming home soon." The vow extended now, pulling her into its fold, a chance to mend what the road had broken. But as lightning cracked the sky, illuminating the horizon, a new alert pinged, Reyes' men mobilizing, roadblocks forming. The auction disrupted, the web lashed back, promising a hunt that would test loyalties to the breaking point. Ethan mounted up, rain streaking his visor, the scent of wet leather mingling with resolve. 70 riders followed, engines defying the downpour, toward a safe house in the hills where plans would forge into action. Honor wasn't quiet anymore. It thundered, demanding justice in a world that had forgotten its weight. The storm raged on, mirroring the one within, as the Iron Vow rode into the fray, unbreakable. If this tale of quiet courage stirs something in you, smash that like button below. It helps these stories of redemption reach more lost souls out there. Rain lashed the convoy like 1,000 accusing fingers, turning the highway into a slick ribbon of peril under the bruised sky. Ethan Harlan's tires hydroplaned through puddles that reflected the lightning's jagged fury, his Harley a steadfast anchor amid the chaos. The safe house loomed ahead, a weathered cabin tucked into the forested hills, its tin roof groaning under the deluge, smoke curling faintly from a stone chimney like a signal fire. 70 riders pulled in one by one, engines sputtering to silence as water streamed from leather jackets and pooled on the gravel drive. The air hung heavy with the scent of wet pine and ozone, a stark contrast to the dry desperation of the desert they'd left behind. Inside, the cabin's single room glowed under the flicker of a lantern, shadows dancing across knotty pine walls, lined with maps and the laptop's harsh blue light. Caleb hunched over the device, his prosthetic leg extended as rain drummed a relentless rhythm on the windows. Footage from the mill played in loops. Grainy clips of Reyes's face, twisted in avarice as figures shuffled from trailers into the gloom. "We've got gold here," Caleb said, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a knife. "Time stamps, plates, even audio of the bids. But uploading it all? We need a conduit, someone clean outside the spin." Lena paced the creaky floorboards, her boots leaving muddy prints. The scar on her collarbone, a pale line under her damp shirt. "National press is circling, but half are in pockets. I know a reporter," Grace Harlan, no relation, but sharp as a switchblade. She broke a border story last year. Got threats, but didn't fold. Ethan's head snapped up at the name, a flicker of something personal crossing his features. Grace, his daughter's aunt, distant kin he'd cut ties with after the divorce, her letters unanswered in a box under his bed. The web tightened, pulling old threads into the present. Marcus leaned against the hearth, nursing a mug of black coffee that steamed like battlefield fog. Reyes knows we're onto him. That guard we tied, he'll talk and roadblocks are multiplying. We leak this, it forces their hand, auctions busted. But the pipeline's still flowing upstream. Tommy, bandaging a shallow cut on his arm from the mill skirmish, nodded grimly. And those families we saw? They're out there, waiting for the next lock. The room fell quiet, the weight of unseen eyes pressing in, the vows code echoing unspoken. Protect the lost, no matter the shadows it cast. Ethan stood by the window, watching the storm rage through the pines, branches whipping like frantic signals. Emily's text burned in his pocket, a bridge he hadn't crossed in years. Proud? Scared? She'd seen the news feeds, the chopper shots of bikes thundering through rain. He'd failed her once, riding away after the arguments that shattered their home, burying grief in miles. But Lila's trust. The mill's horrors, they reignited the promise from that jungle grave. Make it mean something, brother. This wasn't just a raid, it was absolution, threading through the family he'd forsaken. We send the files to Grace, Ethan decided, his voice steady as the cabin's timbers. Anonymized through Caleb's encryption. She runs it, the nation sees the truth. Reyes, the badges, the whole rotten chain. Lena pulled out her phone, fingers tapping a secure line, the signal flickering like hope in the tempest. As the upload began, a low rumble shook the ground, not thunder, but engines approaching through the downpour. Headlights pierced the veil, a dozen bikes emerging from the tree line, reinforcements from the northern chapters, their vests sodden but emblems gleaming. The newcomers dismounted, water cascading off them like shed burdens. Leading them was Samuel, an old war buddy with a limp from the same campaign that scarred Ethan, his eyes hollow but fierce. Heard the call, Samuel said, clasping Ethan's forearm in a grip that spoke of shared graves. Lost a niece to this filth years back, disappeared on a family trip. Vow pulled me south. More faces followed. Veterans, mechanics, wanderers, bound by the iron key tattoo, swelling their numbers to near 100. The cabin brimmed with quiet resolve, the air thick with the scent of damp leather and brewing determination. But peace shattered with a crackle on the radio, static-laced voices from a sheriff's frequency. Bikers hold up in the hills. Reyes wants them swept. Non-lethal, but make it stick. Ethan exchanged glances, the net closed, roadblocks evolving into hunts. We move at first light, he said, mapping a route through back trails to Grace's contact point in the next county. No heroics. We deliver the proof. Let the light do the work. Yet doubt lingered, a shadow in his chest. Reyes' reach might silence Grace before the story broke, or worse, drag innocence into the crossfire. Night deepened, the storm easing to a persistent drizzle that pattered like hesitant footsteps. Ethan stepped onto the porch, the wood slick under his boots, staring into the dark where the river rushed swollen and wild. Samuel joined him, the two men silent sentinels against the chill. You carrying ghosts again? Samuel asked, his breath fogging the air. Ethan nodded, the scar pulling tight. Emily reached out, first time in years. Samuel clapped his shoulder. Vows for them too, the ones we almost lost. Ride it out, brother. Inside, the group shared stories around a crackling fire, voices low and laced with the grit of roads traveled. Lena monitored the upload's progress, a green bar inching toward completion, while Tommy sharpened tools, Not weapons, but cutters for any chains fate might throw. The promise wove through their words, a tapestry of redemption, ex-soldiers mending what war broke, riders choosing family over solitude. As dawn's first grey light filtered through the clouds, Ethan felt the shift, a moral tide turning, the iron vow not just surviving but striking at the heart. They rolled out in waves, bikes weaving through mist-shrouded trails, the forest a cathedral of dripping leaves and hidden paths. Grace's office was a beacon, but en route, a blockade loomed, a sheriff's barricade across a narrow bridge, lights flashing like false stars. Ethan signaled a halt, the convoy idling to a whisper. "Talk our way through," he murmured. But Marcus spotted the tension. Deputies with hands on holsters, Reyes's influence etched in their stances. Approaching alone, Ethan killed his engine, boots crunching on wet gravel as rain resumed in sheets. "Just passing through?" he called, hands visible, the ledger's weight in his bag a secret talisman. The lead deputy, face hardened by small-town power, eyed the shadows behind. "Papers, and tell your pack to stand down." Tension coiled like a spring, the river below churning with unspoken threats. Ethan's mind raced, force the crossing, risk the vow's code, or parley for time. In that suspended moment, a new roar echoed from the rear. More riders, allies closing the gap. The deputy's radio squawked, hesitation cracking his resolve. "Stand down," came the order, faint but clear. Grace's story breaking early. Leaks from the upload hitting airwaves. Headlines flashed in Ethan's thoughts, truth unbound. The blockade parted like fog, the convoy surging forward, engines triumphant against the fading storm. Miles later, at a nondescript warehouse on the city's edge, Grace waited, sharp-eyed, notebook in hand, her nod to Ethan a bridge to the past. Files received, this ends today. As the sun broke through, gilding the wet world, Ethan felt the promise crest, justice not in fists but in light, piercing the dark. Yet Reyes' shadow lingered, a final stand brewing, testing the iron vow's unbreakable core. The ride continued, toward reckoning and the family waiting beyond. The warehouse's corrugated walls loomed like a fortress of forgotten steel, rain still dripping from its eaves in erratic rhythms that echoed the pulse of Ethan's resolve. Sunlight slanted through the clouds, painting golden streaks across the concrete floor where Grace Harlan stood, her silhouette sharp against the stacks of pallets and humming fluorescence. She was a force, mid-40s, with cropped hair and eyes that dissected lies like a surgeon's blade. Her notebook clutched like a shield. Ethan dismounted last, his boots echoing in the vast space as the convoy idled outside, a low growl underscoring the tension. Nearly 100 riders now, their numbers a testament to the vow's reach, engines ticking like impatient hearts in the damp air. Grace met his gaze, a flicker of recognition crossing her features, not just professional, but familial. The aunt he'd ghosted after the divorce, her concern for Emily, a silent bridge. The files are dynamite, Ethan. Reyes' face on every manifest, payoffs to sheriffs, even ties to out-of-state buyers. I've got contacts at the networks. It's going live by noon, no spin. Her voice carried the weight of battles fought in print, the scent of fresh ink and coffee clinging to her coat. Lena handed over the drive, a small black key to the kingdom of truth, while Marcus scanned the perimeter, his hand resting near his belt, not for drawing, but for readiness. Ethan nodded, the scar on his back a warm throb under his damp shirt, reminding him of the jungle promise that had birthed this moment. It ends with exposure. No more shadows. But as Grace turned to her setup, a laptop arrayed on a makeshift desk, screens flickering with previews of the story, her phone buzzed, shattering the fragile calm. She answered, her face hardening. "What do you mean, blocked? The feeds are jammed?" Static crackled, then silence. Caleb, fiddling with his own rig nearby, cursed under his breath. Jamming signals. Reyes tech, probably. He's pulling strings to bury it. The air thickened, the warehouse's metallic tang mixing with the ozone of impending storm. Outside, Tommy's voice cut through the comms. Hostiles inbound, 3 SUVs blacked out, circling the block. Samuel, the newcomer from the north, gripped his handlebars, his limp forgotten in the surge of adrenaline. We hold the line. Vow doesn't fold. Ethan felt the pull of it all. The children's faces from the trailers, Lila's fragile trust, Emily's hesitant words lighting up his screen again. Grace called, said you're in deep. Come back whole. Redemption wasn't abstract anymore. It was this warehouse, this stand, mending the fractures he'd left in his wake. They barricaded the doors with crates. The scrape of wood, a gritty underscore to the rising whine of tires on wet pavement. Grace worked feverishly, rerouting the files through satellite bounces, her fingers a blur. One way or another, it gets out. But we need time. Lena positioned herself by the side entrance, her medic's calm masking the fire of a woman who'd lost too much to indifference. Marcus and Caleb rigged distractions, flares from saddlebags, meant to draw eyes without harm. The iron vow formed ranks outside, a wall of leather and chrome under the breaking sun, rain-slicked vests gleaming like armor forged in loyalty. The SUVs screeched to a halt, doors flying open to spill a dozen men, hired muscle in tactical gear, faces masked, batons and tasers glinting. No badges, just Reyes's private enforcers, the kind bought with dirty money. "Stand down," the lead barked, his voice amplified through a bullhorn, the echo bouncing off the warehouse walls like a hollow threat. Ethan stepped forward, hands raised, but stance unyielding, the wind carrying the faint scent of gun oil and fierce sweat. "We're not the criminals here. Your boss's house of cards is falling. Let the truth speak." A tense standoff stretched, seconds ticking like a fuse. One enforcer advanced, taser crackling blue arcs, but Samuel's shout from the flank halted him. "You want to fight? We've got 100 reasons to end this clean." The numbers told. The men hesitated, radios buzzing with urgent chatter. Inside, Grace's screens lit up. A breakthrough, the story piercing the jam via an old analog line, headlines blooming across feeds. Corrupt official exposed in human trafficking ring. Bikers uncover the truth. The bullhorn fell silent, the enforcers exchanging uneasy glances as their earpieces flooded with panic from higher up. Chaos rippled through their ranks. One bolted for his vehicle, phone to ear. Spilling fragments. Reyes is raging. Feds inbound. The auction's blown. The leader lunged at Ethan, baton swinging in a wide arc, but Marcus intercepted, a precise tackle that sent them both sprawling into puddles. Fists connected with grunts, not lethal but firm. The bikers disarming with the efficiency of men who'd chosen protection over destruction. Lena patched a minor scrape on Tommy's brow, her hands steady as the first sirens wailed, real ones this time, federal lights cutting through the haze, drawn by Grace's leak. As the enforcers were cuffed by arriving agents, the warehouse doors swung wide. Grace emerged, notebook in hand, her story now a national blaze. "It's over," she said to Ethan, pulling him into a brief, fierce hug, the first in years. "Emily's waiting, she saw the broadcast." Ethan's chest tightened, the vow's iron grip loosening just enough to let light in. Samuel clapped his back, the group dispersing as media vans swarmed, cameras capturing the dawn of justice. But in the rear view as they rode out, Ethan spotted a lone figure on a ridge. Reyes himself, binoculars lowered, face a mask of fury. The web was cracked, but the spider lingered, plotting one last venomous strike. The convoy thundered toward home, the heartland unfolding in greens and golds, carrying the promise forward. Loyalty had held, redemption glimpsed, but the final test brewed on the horizon, demanding everything from the man who'd once run from his own. The road whispered of closure, of family reclaimed. as engines devoured the miles toward an end that honor alone could forge. The sun hung low over the warehouse district, its rays fracturing through lingering clouds to cast elongated shadows across the rain-slicked pavement. Ethan Harlan stood at the forefront of the Iron Vow, his leather vest heavy with the day's damp, the faint scent of ozone and exhaust clinging to the air like a fading echo of the storm. Nearly 100 riders formed an unyielding line, their Harleys idling in a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the ground, a chorus of solidarity against the encroaching SUVs. The enforcers spilled out, their tactical gear glistening under the emerging light, batons at the ready, faces obscured by masks that hid nothing of their calculated menace. The lead man's bullhorn crackled once more, his voice slicing the tension. "Last chance. Drop the drive and scatter, or we make this messy." Ethan's grip tightened on his handlebars, the metal cool and familiar under calloused palms, an anchor to the vow that had carried him this far. Behind him, Marcus shifted subtly, his bruised knuckles flexing, while Lena's steady gaze scanned for openings, her medic's instincts poised to protect rather than harm. Samuel flanked the left, his limp swallowed by the moment's gravity, the shared scars of old wars binding them tighter than any chain. Inside the warehouse, Grace's screens flickered with urgency, the upload fighting through digital barriers, her muttered curses a quiet undercurrent to the standoff. Emily's latest text burned in Ethan's pocket. "Grace says it's breaking. Don't make me lose you, too." A lifeline pulling at the edges of his resolve, reminding him that redemption wasn't solitary. It wove through the family he'd nearly forsaken. The enforcers advanced in a ragged formation, tasers humming with electric promise, the air sharpening with the tang of impending conflict. One lunged toward the doors, but Tommy intercepted with a swift shoulder check, sending the man stumbling into a puddle that splashed like shattered glass. Fists met in controlled bursts, grunts and scuffles echoing off the steel walls, the bikers disarming with precision born of restraint, not rage. No blades drawn, no lethal intent. The Iron Vow fought for exposure, for the light that would unravel the shadows. Caleb's flares ignited from the perimeter, bursts of red light arcing skyward like signals of defiance, drawing eyes and buying seconds. "Hold the line!" Ethan called, his voice gravel-steady, cutting through the fray as he blocked a baton swing aimed at Lena, the impact jarring up his arm like an old wound reopening. Inside, Grace's breakthrough came with a triumphant chime. The story, surging onto networks, unfiltered footage of the mill's horrors painting screens across the nation. Headlines bloomed in real time. Trafficking empire crumbles, bikers expose corrupt web. Her voice carried over the comms, breathless but fierce. "It's live, feds are en route, 5 minutes out." The enforcers' radios erupted in chaos, fragmented orders dissolving into panic. "Abort! The boss is pulling out! Evidence everywhere!" The lead man faltered, his bullhorn dropping with a clatter, mask slipping to reveal sweat-beaded doubt. Reyes' machine, greased by years of silence, ground to a halt under the weight of truth. The pipeline's dark heart laid bare for all to see. Federal sirens pierced the horizon first, a wailing crescendo that turned the standoff into surrender. Black SUVs, clean badges this time, screeched into the lot, agents swarming with authoritative shouts, cuffing the enforcers amid the dissipating smoke of flares. The air shifted, charged with the sharp scent of authority unchained, as Reyes's men were herded into vans. Their masks stripped away to expose the ordinary faces of complicity. Ethan watched from the warehouse steps, chest heaving, the adrenaline ebbing like the receding storm clouds. Grace emerged, drive in hand, her eyes meeting his with a nod that bridged the years of silence. "You did it, Ethan. The kids from the trailers, Lila and the others, they're safe, placed with families who'll protect them. Your vow, it saved more than you know." The convoy's engines quieted one by one, riders dismounting to clasp forearms and share nods, the chosen family standing tall in the golden light. Samuel lingered near Ethan, his voice low against the bustle of agents cataloguing evidence. "That jungle promise? You honored it today, brother. Ghosts can rest now." Ethan felt the scar on his back ease, the weight of buried regrets lifting like mist under the sun. His phone vibrated. "Emily, saw it all. Coming to meet you. Proud doesn't cover it." The words blurred in his vision, a quiet victory sweeter than any raid's end. He'd ridden from loss to this. Not glory, but the quiet justice of promises kept, loyalty's unyielding forge, mending what time had frayed. As the feds secured the site, whispers spread of Reyes's arrest at a private airstrip, his empire fracturing under indictments that would echo for years. The nation watched. Stories of the Iron Vow shifting from suspicion to symbol. Bikers as guardians, not outlaws. Their emblem of the clenched fist and rusted key etched into public memory. Ethan mounted his Harley last, the engine's rumble a familiar solace. The road ahead stretching toward home. A small town where Emily waited, arms open, and Sophia's clinic where Lila's laughter would soon ring free. The crew formed up behind him, 100 strong now, their taillights winking like stars in the dusk as they rolled out, the warehouse shrinking in the rear view, the heartland unfolded in soft gradients of green and amber, the wind carrying the clean scent of renewal, free of the desert's dust and the mill's decay. Ethan glanced back once, the vow's fire banked but eternal, a legacy of silent actions rippling outward. Redemption wasn't a finish line, it was the ride, paved with honor and the bonds that outlasted storms. As the sun dipped, gilding the horizon, he accelerated, the promise fulfilled, not in vengeance, but in the light of truth, binding the lost to the found forever. Thank you for riding along on this journey of unbreakable vows and quiet courage. If these tales of redemption touch your heart, hit that subscribe button and join our family. We've got more stories waiting on the horizon.